All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's web seminar. I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Andy, to take us through the webinar.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to be hosting this webinar, Creating Housing for Youth, Homekey's 8% Youth Set Aside in Round 2. We have a wonderful, eclectic group of panelists that are going to be providing an update on Round 2 of Homekey, and we'll be meeting them in just a few moments. But to just set the table, as I'm sure you're all aware, Homekey is administered by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Homekey funds the purchase, rehabilitation, and construction of interim and permanent housing for individuals and families experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And Round 2 and 3 of Homekey excitedly contain a youth set-aside requiring that 8% of Homekey funds be made available to projects serving homeless youth, or again, youth specifically at risk of homelessness. A little bit of housekeeping. If you'd like to move to the next slide, please. So we will be providing a link to a recording of this webinar, as well as several of the resources that we will be sharing later on. The chat function has been disabled, but please feel free to utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask a question of the host or any of the panelists. We will have a Q&A toward the end of the discussion, and we will go over that agenda next. So again, welcome. We're going to be starting with a brief welcome and introduction of Homekey, and then I am very excited to pass it on to representatives from the Department of Housing and Community Development, who will provide a broader overview of Round 2 of Homekey, as well as an update on the youth set-aside from this most recent second round of funding. We're then excited to meet 2 projects that are serving youth that successfully received funding in this previous round to give an update on their projects and what their experience was like in applying and putting together their projects. We will then have a panel discussion with those projects, asking a couple questions again about their experience. JBAY will then be providing several resources that may help you if you are potentially interested in applying to Round 3 funding. And again, we will be sharing links to all of those resources at the end. And finally, a live Q&A session where we will be answering the questions you may have throughout the presentation. And again, as those questions do come up, feel free to use the Q&A functionality at the bottom of the page. Let's go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, a very, very impressive and eclectic group of panelists today. I'll give a brief introduction to them now, and then we'll be meeting them throughout the presentation. First of all, from John Burton Advocates for Youth, you have myself, Andy Lomelli. I'm a project manager. You already met Simone Turek-Lee, who will be providing some of those resources later on toward the end of the presentation. From California's Department of Housing and Community Development, we have Jason Blair, a manager from Program Design and Implementation. Emma Marin, Section Chief with Program Design and Implementation. And Colleen Monahan, Senior Program Specialist with Program Design and Implementation. As I mentioned, we have 2 wonderful projects that are serving youth. The first one being Valley Lodge Apartments. We have representatives Janine Evans. She is the Director of Pre-Development and Compliance from Abode Services. Associate Director of Housing Development, Jocelyn Lynn from Burbank Housing. And Amber Twitchell, the Associate Director of Voices. And the second project we'll be meeting is Mesa Ojai in the city of Ojai. Representing this project, we have Chelsea Russell, Management Analyst, Community Development Division with the Ventura County Executive Office, and Dan Parzial, the co-founder of Mesa. So to get us started, I will pass along to Colleen from HCD, who will provide an overview of Homekey 2.0.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Colleen Monahan. I'm a specialist here on the Homekey team at HCD. I'm incredibly excited to be sharing a little bit about our program today and to learn more about these amazing projects. So Homekey Round 1 was initially announced by Governor Newsom in July of 2020 as an element of the state strategy to protect Californians experiencing homelessness during the COVID-19 pandemic. So with the pandemic placing people experiencing homelessness at a high risk for COVID, Homekey served the dual purpose of converting underutilized motels and hotels into housing units, as well as getting our most vulnerable population off the street and into safe housing. So simply put, Homekey is a grant program for local governments to rapidly build or convert housing units for people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. Next slide, please. So the Homekey Round 2 NOFA made available $1.45 billion, with $1.2 billion derived from the Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund and $250 million allocated from the State General Fund. The program has an over-the-counter application process requiring a threshold score of 120 or greater. And our awards have been made on a rolling first-come, first-served basis. So from the release of the application through January 31st, applications were grouped into geographic regions with a bonus award incentivizing application submission before that deadline. Maintaining a sense of urgency to rapidly expand the inventory of housing available to people experiencing homelessness, HCD has made funds available right away or as quickly as possible to communities that are ready while giving more time to apply to the communities that need it. So recognizing that communities across California have differing levels of capacity, in this round, we have doubled down on the technical assistance available to applicants to help those applicants submit successful applications and to ensure that every community has the chance to compete for these funds. After the initial intake survey, applicants are able to, in that initial intake survey, the applicants submit to start the application process. They can request technical assistance. So this support is available from right when the applicant starts the application. We've contracted with amazing technical assistance providers to help with everything from pre-development assistance and identifying feasible housing projects, project financial sustainability, relocation assistance, site assessment, program outreach, community engagement, decarbonization strategies, supportive service plan development, etc. And this technical assistance is available to any and every applicant that wants this support. Next slide, please. So we welcome and will consider a wide variety of innovative housing solutions as eligible projects for Homekey. As you will see in a later slide, many applicants have had success converting hotels and motels into housing units, but we truly have seen a staggering variety of project types. Beyond the acquisition and rehabilitation of motels, hotels, commercial properties, and existing homes, eligible uses for Round 2 funds include new construction, master leasing of properties for non-congregate shelter, and relocation costs, amongst many others. Next slide, please. So the Homekey grant is structured such that the department will contribute a baseline amount per door, as you can see in this slide, in whichever category is higher for the assisted units. Projects that are serving homeless youth or youth at risk of homelessness can receive a baseline capital award of $175,000 per door. Above this, the applicant may leverage a one-to-one local match to provide up to an additional $100,000 per door. And an important note, Homekey funds doors based on the number of units and the unit size at the time of acquisition. Next slide, please. All right, this is the slide that gets everyone excited. One of the defining characteristics of Homekey is the incredibly fast turnaround time and a sense of urgency we believe to be commensurate with the scale of California's homelessness crisis. So with that said, some important deadlines to note. Homekey capital awards must be spent within 8 months of award. We aim to make awards within 45 days of receiving an application. All rehab must be completed within 1 year of the award. And the important caveat that there is an opportunity for extension for circumstances that are outside of the applicant's control. So in Homekey round 1 and somewhat in Homekey round 2, we have worked with communities that were impacted by wildfires and supply chain delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we want to ensure that flexibility is built in. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot from the dashboard that is available on the Homekey website, and I would invite each one of you to go take a look at it. It's incredibly interesting and well done. So as of Thursday, when I pulled this image, we have awarded more than $1.1 billion to 70 projects, funding more than 4,000 homes. Of those 70 projects awarded, 14 are TAY projects that will serve 249 homeless youth. Next slide, please. As you can see here, the vast majority of awards were for the acquisition and rehab of hotels and motels, followed by the acquisition of multifamily structures and modular housing. The majority of our applicants were counties and cities, and the vast majority of co-applicants were nonprofits. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Angela Marin, to talk about the youth set-aside.
Thank you, Colleen. So hi, everyone. I'm Angela Marin, Section Chief at Homekey. I'm going to talk about specifically the youth set-aside and also give you an update on round 2 and what we funded so far within the youth set-aside. So as you can see here, the Homekey NOFA has 5 different buckets or 5 different set-asides. And the homeless youth set-aside is the only one that is actually required by statute at the 8% level. Next slide, please. So the Homekey statute requires no less than 8% to be designated for youth at risk of homelessness or youth who are currently homeless. And the Homekey round 2 NOFA further explains the bounds of how we would determine which populations would be eligible for this funding. So the round 2 NOFA defines homeless youth or youth at risk of homelessness per federal regulations. And that regulation, which is Title 24 of the federal regs, defines unaccompanied youth under 25 in a variety of ways. It references a lot of other federal laws and regs, and specifically the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which a lot of you might be familiar with. That act ensures that the educational rights and protections of children and youth experiencing homelessness are protected. The Homekey round 2 NOFA also prioritizes projects with at least 25% of youth units to be funded, but Homekey has funded projects with less units than that as well. And I guess on this, we've seen a lot of applications with coming in with kind of mixed population projects, and we are relying on those applicants and those local communities to tell us what it is that they need. Some of these communities don't have any youth serving projects in their area, so we think that it's a win to at least fund some units in these mixed projects. And I'm eager to hear from our other panelists how this works in implementation, but we're definitely looking at the supported services plans and how those are designed in a youth-centric way to serve youth in these mixed projects in a way that makes sense for that population specifically. So as we're looking at what we're funding, we're definitely looking at that population served appropriately. Per our NOFA, like I said, we can fund mixed projects or youth-only projects, but all of the youth-funded units come from the youth set-aside. So we're tracking the youth set-aside kind of independently to quantify how many units we've funded statewide. Like Colleen mentioned, the youth units are funded at a premium and not just on the capital side, but also the operating, just to ensure that folks have resources to do this work, and also really to incentivize folks to come in for this youth set aside, because we know that there's not a lot of youth specific units out there statewide. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the status in round 2. To date, we funded almost $72 million toward youth units, and about 60 million of it is for capital and around 11 million for operations. We funded projects all over California in all of our regions as defined by our NOFA. We've set or separated the state into different regions to ensure some equity. And I'm happy to say that we funded projects everywhere, including one tribal project that has some youth units. We have about 38% left to award, but we're currently working through applications, and we expect to commit the full amount by the end of the NOFA period. And about half of the funds awarded have gone to award mixed population projects, and the other half are youth only projects. So we funded about 14 projects, but the funding has really been split into that mixed population project versus youth only project. And the 71 million represents 249 youth assisted units, and we also fund manager units within projects to help with, property management. And not all projects have youth units. I'm sorry, not all youth projects have manager units. And just to give you more of an idea of what we are actually funding with this money, we funded 57% of those units as permanent housing. So these are units that have to be restricted for this population for 55 years and require different programming than the interim housing units that are perhaps more of the temporary kind. But they're both, as we understand it, they're both needed in these communities. So it's kind of cool to see that we have a little bit of both of those in this pot of money. Next slide, please. I'm gonna kick it off now to Valley Lodge Apartments.
And for this, we will be hearing from Jocelyn Lin from Burbank Housing.
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Lin. I'm Associate Director of Housing Development for Burbank Housing, and I'm happy to talk to you about Valley Lodge Apartments. Thanks so much for having me. So first of all, I just want to give a little bit of background of Burbank Housing. We're a nonprofit housing developer in the North Bay. We have properties all over Sonoma County and Napa County. And we've been very active in the Homekey space since round one in 2020. We actually had two projects in round one. One was in Santa Rosa with the Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians of the Stewart's Point Rancheria. So that was actually Homekey's first tribal project. And then we also partnered with the County of Napa on Adrian Court, which is also in Napa, and we coordinated with Abode Services on that project as well. And then in round two this past year, we actually have three projects, one in the city of Healdsburg, one in city of Petaluma, and then one with the city of Napa, which is our Valley Lodge project. And in this one, we are working with Abode Services, who will be the lead service provider. And because we have transition-aged youth in this project, we believe, it's important to have the supportive services geared toward them. And so we've collaborated with Voices, who will be providing services to those residents. Next slide, please. So Valley Lodge Apartments is the conversion of the Wine Valley Lodge, which is a motel in Napa. And it's 54 units. All 54 units will be converting to studio apartments. We are turning these units into permanent supportive housing. So we'll be, putting in kitchenettes in all units, and 14 of the units will be reserved for youth, and the other units will be for chronically homeless or homeless under the HCD definition. We'll be acquiring this property through a long-term lease. We have an option to lease it from the owner. And our Homekey award was about 18 million, and we're looking to start rehab construction in June and to have it open by fall of this year. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, all 54 studio units will be filled with residents that will be referred through coordinated entry. In addition to those 54 units, we'll have one on-site manager's unit. 40 of the units, again, will be set aside for homeless or chronically homeless under HC's definition, and 14 units will be for homeless youth. Again, supportive services will be provided for by abode services as well as voices. Next slide, please. So in addition to the Homekey Award, this project had a lot of financing partners, which we're so appreciative of. Again, Homekey is a collaboration with many organizations. The city of Napa, was our co-applicant on this project, and they're putting in money from their impact fee fund, Affordable Housing Trust Fund, as well as CDBG-DR and project-based vouchers. The County of Napa, again, from their Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and they were a partner with us on our Adrian Court project. So this is kind of like our second project with the county and our first project with the city of Napa. And then in addition, we had money from a local source, Providence Queen of the Valley Medical Center. They've been a longtime partner with us on permanent supportive housing. They provided funding for our Adrian Court project, as well as one of our other PSH projects in Napa. And then we received a grant from Wells Fargo. They provided accelerator grants for Homekey projects to pay for pre-development expenses. So that was one of the first grants we got, which helped pay for a lot of the costs leading up to submitting our application to Homekey. Next slide, please. So the timeline for Valley Lodge is we received our award back in February. We applied, I think, in the fall, and then we're looking to close on the property at the end of this month or in the next couple of weeks, and then start the construction rehab in early June. And because we want to receive our occupancy bonus, again, trying to lease up within 8 months of our award date, we're targeting October 15th for full lease up and occupancy. And so that's our Valley Lodge apartment project, and you'll be hearing from Janine and Amber later on the services. Thank you.
And we want to thank everybody involved with this project. JBAY has prepared, with their help, a profile that's published on our website. You can find the URL here. Again, this will be shared later. But you can go and see many of the details for the project, including some images and more concrete details about some of the programming that will be provided to the youth, which again, we'll be discussing a little bit more later on as well. A reminder to folks who are attending the webinar, if you do have a question, please utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your page, and we will get to those questions at the end of the presentation. But next, we will be hearing from another wonderful project, this one being youth serving, and I'm going to pass it off to Dan Parzial with Mesa of Ojai.
Hi, everyone. It's really good to be here and really appreciate John Burton for hosting and for HCD for all of their support and for joining. We are on the call today with our partners with Ventura County, and definitely couldn't have done this project without them. So excited to hear from them as well and to tell you a little bit about what we're building. So we are a very, very new nonprofit. We incorporated, got our 501c3 in December of 2020. I have a long history in homeless services working in Los Angeles, but launched Mesa with the specific goal of addressing youth homelessness and moving upstream from kind of chronic homelessness to try and prevent experiences of homelessness for our young adults. Next slide, please. So you see an image of our farm here. So we closed on this property at the end of March. It's a 10-acre, mostly citrus farm here in Ojai. As you can tell, this is a very rural part of Ojai. And we are going to be focusing largely on mental health, really building out our transitional housing with a foundation of wellness, and feel like this is a pretty amazing spot to be doing it. So we are working 100% with transition age youth. The housing is it's an existing home, and we'll be adding 10 tiny homes to the property as well. And our goal is to have people living on site by the end of the year. If you could, next slide, please. So get a little overview of the layout of the housing here. In addition to this, we will be adding a pretty large solar array. Mesa is a 1% for the Planet nonprofit partner. So everything that we are doing has both the interests of the participants in mind, but also a real focus on environmental health and sustainability. So you have some details here around the tiny homes. We'll be adding 8 studio size tiny homes, roughly 160 square feet. And then 2 larger units that will be sized appropriately for young parents. So we're really excited about the use of the tiny homes as an intervention model, not just because we'll be utilizing really beautiful, both architecturally beautiful, but functional spaces, but also because it allows us to work with a wide variety of participants. A lot of these projects that are in more of a group setting tend to focus on one gender. And because of the privacy and safety that the tiny homes afford, we will be able to serve anyone that the county refers to us. So we're really excited about that. The reason why this square footage was used, because of environmental regulations, we could only increase the square footage of the property by 10%. And so we were trying to maximize the number of units that we could build within the square footage allowed to us. Next slide, please. So I mentioned some of the environmental considerations. We will be converting a portion of the farm into a permaculture food forest. Mostly used for food production for the property itself and for like local food banks, CSAs, et cetera. But we'll be incorporating horticultural therapy as well. So one of the, I think, defining factors of our program is choice. We really want to provide our participants with as many options as possible that relate to their own mental and physical wellness, their education, vocational training, et cetera. So we'll be building that out, both for kind of the practical uses of the food, but also to help support the participants in their wellness. So we'll be building out a group yoga and meditation space. We'll be using ocean-friendly landscaping, building out a community room. So really trying to have a nice balance of personal space, but also creating community for the folks that are living on site. Next, please. So I don't know, you may be able to copy and paste that link to learn a little bit more about the project, but JBAY has highlighted some aspects of it. Next, please.
Dan, I think this is the end of the overview section, and then the rest of the slides will be during the panel. So I think, Andy, it's on to you for our next transition.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Dan. And as Dan mentioned, we have a profile available for both these projects available on JBAY's website. The URL here does highlight Mesa's work, and we'll be sharing that resource later on in the presentation as well. But for now, we are going to transition to a panel discussion with a couple questions specifically addressing, again, some of the program tailored toward youth. And we're going to start with the service providers for these projects. And the question specifically is going to go to Janine, Amber, and Dan. And the question is, what types of services will be offered to youth in your program at your Homekey project? Let's start with Janine.
Thank you, Andy. We can go to the next slide and I can kind of give an overview. Good morning, everyone. So as Jocelyn mentioned, Abode is the lead service provider for Valley Lodge, and Voices is providing enhanced services to the TAY set-aside units. So I think one is that collaboration is really key, and we'll sort of highlight it as we go through the discussion. But just sort of a very high-level view of Abode and the services we provide. We really believe in investing in the community and investing in the neighborhood. And what that means is identifying local community-based providers and partnering. I know it takes a village to end homelessness and support unhoused folks. So without that partnership, we really can't be that effective. So really looking at the neighborhood, doing community mapping, identifying what's in the vicinity, what are the residents at Valley Lodge going to have accessible to them. And luckily we're in a really resource-rich area with physical healthcare, behavioral healthcare, as well as on-site case management and resident service coordination. So really sort of establishing those partnerships so that, again, the residents are supported at Valley Lodge. Abode is an early proponent, and this is the foundation of our organization for housing. We are a housing first organization, meaning if someone is unhoused, it's unlikely that they're going to think, oh, I have to go get my driver's license, or I have to go to my medical appointment to make sure my benefits are lined up. They're really focusing on survival. So without having a housing first model, we're really not solving anything. Originally the model was a housing readiness model, but again, many organizations throughout the country are now housing first. But with that, we need to have on-site services in order for that to be effective. So for Homekey, we do provide on-site behavioral health, individualized case management, where we develop individualized service plans that's resident-led, and really building a plan that's attainable and that is, again, resident-guided and led. Ideally, the goals that we're working towards are increasing self-sufficiency as well as, independence, but also housing retention. You get someone housed, how do you keep them housed? So we really see sort of that collaboration with Voices as being really critical for the 14 TAY set aside in supporting with on-site mediation, with property management potentially, as well as partnering on any sort of service provision needs that the tenant identifies. I do want to note the collaboration with Voices only works when you're meeting frequently and consistently. So I know certainly, we haven't moved to operations yet, as Jocelyn mentioned in the timeline. But once we do, we anticipate meeting at least weekly as an on-site team with property management, with Voices, with Abode, and having ongoing discussions and care consultation. And that's sort of really a key component of our collaboration. I want to give some time to Amber to talk about Voices and again, that enhanced service coordination for the TAY set aside.
Thank you, Janine. I appreciate that. If we could go to the next slide, that would be fabulous. Hi, hello, everybody. My name is Amber Twitchell. I'm the director of Voices here in Napa. We also have youth drop-in centers in Sonoma County and Solano County. Voices is cool and unique in that it is run by the young people that come out of the systems of care themselves. So we work really hard to make sure that there is authentic and genuine youth engagement and youth leadership embedded in every aspect of Voices. My entire staff of Voices is all young people under the age of 25 that have come out of different systems of care. They run the drop-in centers, they run the services, they do the data and evaluation, they do the budgets, they do all of it. And so we have a really unique ability to really leverage the power of youth and the energy that comes with young people to be able to really provide additional services and like that very like comprehensive wraparound youth-led approach that we know is really successful. On this slide, you can see our kind of model of youth engagement. We took a long time to develop this over the years because we really were trying to capture what the different elements are that make true and authentic youth engagement really work. And so obviously ensuring that there is opportunities for youth leadership is key. Working to make sure that there's a unique culture where honest feedback is provided, where everybody has the opportunity to learn and fail forward. It's really important to make sure that young people feel safe and can come through services believing that they're capable, lovable, and worthy. Voices really focuses on the systems change piece of how we interact with the public systems, making sure that young people have the opportunity to really weigh in and provide insight on the systems that they are working within and living within. Bringing in co-located staff to make sure that services are available in one space so that young people don't have to travel all over to get to different places. Intergenerational learning in that it's important that those of us that have many more years of experience than the young people have an opportunity to both share what we know, but then also learn from the young people. And then really focusing on building an authentic community, again, of support that's made up of peers that understand what it's like to be in the systems, that understand what it's like to be homeless in Napa, which is unique to being homeless in any other city, as we know, and really understands and can create this community where young people feel like they can come together and be who they are. And the reason that this model of engagement is so important in relationship to this housing program is because once we have this model solidified and we have the staffing in place, this model can actually be picked up and moved to different locations. So while we always will have services in our drop-in center, we are bringing our model of youth engagement into this housing project as well. So the young people that are living in the housing projects are going to have access to all of these different elements and most importantly, be supported by peers themselves. Next slide, please. So in terms of what's going to be offered at Napa Valley Wine Lodge, again, like Janine said, we're going to be partnering with Abode. And this is really important because we all know that when multiple service providers get engaged in a project, it can become really easy for us to step all over each other and get territorial. That's just the nature of the work. And so we have to be able to have real and genuine conversations about what's not working and what is working, especially when partners are working with an organization that has youth leaders in every aspect. It takes a special kind of partner to really be able to respect the fact that there are young people sitting at the same tables as them. And, we have a great working relationship with Abode. We've never had any problems with them, balking at the fact that we have young people running around doing all the services, which is amazing. And so in partnership with them and really conscious not to get in the way of their case management, because that's an essential part to the young people keeping their housing, we are going to add on top of what Abode is already doing in collaboration with Abode and always in partnership. So we'll be able to offer that specialized peer-based comprehensive case management, all of the on-site services that are also available in the drop-in center, which are, youth-led employment supports, education supports, health and wellness, benefits navigation, all of those things that are led by young people for young people. And then, of course, obviously trying to get them connected into the Voices drop-in center so that they do have another space for community. And as Janine mentioned, we know that young people have a tendency to not be able to stay in housing for a long period of time. life is crazy, especially right now with everything going on and how they're coming out of the COVID world. We're really worried that these young people are going to need additional support in order to stay stable in their housing. And that's where I think our youth leaders are really going to be able to be helpful, is, you know, having conversations with the young people where they're like, yeah, I understand you don't like living next to this person. I understand you don't want to live in this housing complex for the rest of your life, but if this had been around when I was in your place, this is what I would have taken advantage of, or this is how it can be helpful. The power of youth voice is very, very important in making sure that young people are successful in their housing. I wanted to take just a minute to talk about how I'm figuring out how to leverage all of these funds to be able to do this, because I think it's really interesting. So one of the first things to know is that we are the contractors for the Independent Living Skills Program. So that allows us, one, connection to all of the transition age foster youth in Napa, but then also access to case management support that we're already providing to these young people. Through THP dollars, we're able to have a housing navigator, and we got the child welfare director in Napa to agree that when these units are built, they will go in and approve them as SILPs, which means that then young people can take their independent living payments and actually utilize them to live in these units, which is super important because we don't have units for former foster youth, current or former foster youth in Napa. Those young people are the homeless kids in Napa. And so to be able to leverage this funding, to be able to help them support themselves is really important. And we're really excited to have this opportunity to do that. That is the end of my talking points.
Great. And would love to pass it back to Dan to talk about some of the services that they'll be providing over at Mesa.
Sure. Yeah, and I wanted to highlight a couple of things that were said, because I think, you know, Janine mentioned that, you know, it takes a village, and I wanted to kind of highlight that as it relates specifically to the young adults that are going to be utilizing the housing programs that are supported by Homekey. I think that, you know, it's kind of a common thought, right, that it takes a village to raise a child, and, you know, these are the kids that our communities need to support, and so, you know, it's I think a really amazing opportunity for us to come together and say, you know, we're stepping up, not just our nonprofits, but our county, you know, counterparts, our development partners. You know, we're working with People's Self-Help Housing, for example, you know, to come together, work with our communities to get this done. So thank you for mentioning that. And then also just the housing first model. I mentioned that I came from the homeless services world in Los Angeles within an organization that, you know, very clearly supported housing first as an intervention. But what I think we all realized was that in communities where housing is just not available, housing first is a great concept. But our families and our single adults ended up being in emergency housing for as long as they may have otherwise been in transitional housing. So we, I think as a system nationwide, have tried to move on from transitional housing, so to speak. And I think that makes sense in certain respects and in certain communities. My feeling and our approach at Mesa is that we're really trying to combine a housing first approach within the environment of transitional housing, so that there's the freedom to work on other aspects of your life. And I think that sometimes we get in trouble when we function so strongly within a housing first model that we only talk about housing, which I think can oftentimes be tempting. So just wanted to mention that. We will be offering on-site case management, an on-site house manager, on-site therapist, licensed therapist. Beyond that, our services will be contracted. So I mentioned that we are trying to offer as wide a variety of therapeutic interventions, vocational training options, educational options as possible. And so we'll be utilizing contracted service providers or therapists, et cetera, to provide those interventions. It's kind of a four-pronged approach. So we start with mental and physical wellness. Obviously, we're trying to grow, the most, healthy organic food we can on site, and supplementing that with, locally produced food. And then our participants will have the option of spending a portion of their week working on, mental health, education. Want to ensure that our participants are at least leaving our program with a high school diploma. We know that less than 30% of the kids, aging out of the foster system, for example, have a high school diploma. So we want to make sure that at least that is in place. And then beyond that, let's support each participant with whatever, educational pursuits they're interested in. We're providing transportation to our local junior colleges and Cal State University. Beyond that, we're building out a Rolodex of local businesses that are offering to hire our participants, which is really exciting. So, if a participant is really interested in physical therapy, for example, okay, great, let's get you an internship, a paid internship over at the physical therapy office. I think that sometimes within the homeless services world, we can get stuck in this rhythm of trying to get the folks we're working with to take whatever job is available to them. And the outcomes of that aren't always so great. And I wouldn't want it for me. I wouldn't want it for my kids. So let's, try and make sure that we're offering those kinds of options to the people we're working with. And then last thing is really a community relationship building. So recognizing that resiliency doesn't just come from kind of this strong independence, but a supportive interdependent relationship with our community. So we'll be encouraging our participants to get involved in local nonprofits, spend a portion of each week volunteering for other nonprofits, mentoring a kid at the local elementary school, reading to kids at the library, etc. So they'll be working with their case manager to kind of pursue those different paths forward. Obviously with the transitional housing overlay, it's a maximum of 24 months. We don't want our participants to be on site any longer than they need to, but we also want to make sure that they're in a position where they feel supported and ready to move on. We are applying for rapid rehousing dollars, et cetera, to support participants as they move into their own units. There was one more thing that I wanted to mention, but it may be gone. So I'll save it for later on in the conversation. But this level of support is obviously it costs money, is expensive, and so we are receiving really great support from HCD and the county for our operations. That will represent about 25% of our annual operations costs, and so we are actively fundraising both through government programs, THP was mentioned, so things like that, but also just private philanthropic dollars.
Thank you, Dan. And as Dan mentioned, one of those key partnerships in helping make Mesa Ojai possible and applying for the Homekey funding was a relationship with Ventura County. And I'd love to ask Chelsea at Ventura County, what motivated your county to partner on a youth serving project like Mesa Ojai?
Sure, thank you so much for the question. And so for our county, we issued out a request for letters of interest from partners that we knew were doing development in the community, nonprofits, and received a number of letters of interest for folks who wanted to partner with us to apply for Homekey. And we had an evaluation committee as well that reviewed all these letters, and Mesa rose to the top. And I think a big component of that was we don't really have any resources for transitional age youth when it comes to housing. And that was a big driving factor, I think, as we reviewed what we currently have, what we currently need, and then also looking at our data. And our point in time count, which is done through through HUD, showed that our recent one that we had a 25% increase in homelessness in the community, but for our population of TAY in particular, 62 are unsheltered and 14 are sheltered. And we know with this population, they're invisible to some of these counts because HUD's definition of homelessness is different than how TAY may identify homelessness, which is I'm couch surfing, I'm staying with some friends, so on and so forth. And currently we have about 173 TAY that in the homeless management information system that really helps manage and prioritizes where individuals are placed that are seeking permanent housing. So there's a definite need in our community. Prior to my role coming to the county and working in the county, and I just transitioned over in January, I actually oversaw the basic needs program at California State University, Channel Islands, which is our public 4-year in the community. And just from my experience working there, we saw a doubling of the usage and access of our basic needs resources. And pre-COVID and even post-COVID, or not post-COVID, we're still in COVID, but pre-COVID, we were placing students in emergency housing, approximately about 40 to 50 students. And that continued on through the pandemic and continues to this day. So the need is there and there's no doubt about it. And I think that was a big driving factor. Plus Dan and Kyle are so awesome to work with and super passionate about this project. And so it's been a great partnership to work with them through this whole process.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. As HCD had alluded to earlier, a good chunk of the youth set aside is going toward a mixed population project such as Valley Lodge Apartments, which we met earlier. My next question is for Valley Lodge Apartments, specifically Janine and Amber, and that how is having youth in the mixed project helped your project?
Thank you, Andy. I can start, Amber. I think certainly from a programming perspective, it gives us way more sort of capacity to be able to introduce intergenerational programming. In Napa, the demographics for unhoused folks is, it skews a little bit older generally. So as Jocelyn mentioned, we do have a mix of chronic homeless at the site as well, who will be coming through coordinated entry, as well as the TAY referrals will also be coming from coordinated entry. So I think that component really allows for thoughtful programming implementation. And as I mentioned, around intergenerational programming. So I think that's sort of one major component that I think we'll certainly consider and having that as a huge advantage compared to some of our other projects where we don't have that mix. I also think similar to Ventura County, it sounds our PIT count in Napa is pretty similar with unhoused self-identified TAY. So certainly those 14 units, while it doesn't seem like a big number, is going to make a huge impact to the total count. So our last PIT count in 2020, we identified 54 unhoused TAY. I venture to say that number is much higher, but that was the data that we had for our last PIT count, although we did launch one this year as well. So we'll see what those numbers produce. But certainly those 14 units will make a huge impact with who we're seeing in the emergency shelter, as well as in various encampments throughout Napa. Amber, is there anything that you would like to add there?
I think, a few years back, we did a pretty comprehensive project at Voices where we asked AB 12 young people, so young people in extended foster care, what services they want to see present in the community that would help improve their outcomes. And of course, housing came up as one of the number one things that they needed. And it was a very interesting conversation when really talking to young people about what kind of housing they wanted, because this particular group of young people really wanted to live in congregate housing with populations that were not just other transition aged young people. They wanted to live with other chronically homeless individuals. They wanted to live with other veterans. They want to be able to create a sense of community and not feel like they're all in the same place because they're all the same age, which I thought was really interesting. One young lady said to me specifically, I want to be able to go next door and ask the person next door if I can borrow sugar to make whatever I'm trying to make. And I want them to feel like they can come and talk to me. And so I thought it was really interesting because I had a lot of preconceived notions about what young people would want to see in housing. And that's not what they wanted. And so I think that being able to create a space where young people feel like they can create a community above and beyond the communities that they're already part of, like the foster care system or the homeless youth system, is really important. And I think that bringing young people into this project is going to be helpful in terms of, creating this community that then all of the residents will be able to be a part of. I think that it's going to enhance accountability, especially because you do have double service providers watching everybody. I think that, we're going to have a better line on anybody that's not doing what they're supposed to be doing in the housing, because we do have such strong relationships with young people. And so I think that the mix of individuals that are coming together I think it's going to be really powerful to have this group of different people being able to share space, share learning, and share the opportunity to feel what it is like to really be in safe and stable housing.
Thank you so much. We have just one more question that we'd like to ask. And I know there are a lot of people attending this webinar who are gearing up to apply to the next round of funding and would love to learn from your experiences. And my next question is going to go specifically to Jocelyn and Chelsea. What was your greatest challenge encountered, or what were your biggest lessons learned? Jocelyn, let's start with you.
Sure. As was talked about earlier, the Homekey program really focuses on getting folks housed quickly. And I know Homekey has built-in incentives to make that happen. In round one, there was, actually a requirement to get folks housed, within like three months of award. This year they, changed it to make it more incentive-based, which is to have folks housed within 8 months of your award. And then that way you'd earn an occupancy bonus. So I think, that's one of the challenges for us, is to kind of get into construction rehab as quickly as possible. It is a little difficult because, building departments don't always work that fast in getting permits. And then another layer to a project is that, a lot of these projects have other funding sources that come in that have requirements. So for instance, project-based vouchers are used on a lot of Homekey projects. And project-based vouchers is a federal funding source, and it has to go through the NEPA approval process. And that takes, several months too. And so we were lucky on Valley Lodge to be able to clear that NEPA hurdle earlier on. But I know on other Homekey projects, that's been a challenge right now, because they've got to do an environmental assessment, and then they've got to go through the process of HUD reviewing it. And then, and they can't start on the project until you get that NEPA clearance. So I would say right now, what I'm seeing in a lot of our Homekey projects is, it is challenging to hit that 8-month occupancy deadline. And a lot of us have built in that bonus into our pro forma. We need that money. These projects, they are expensive, not just the acquisition of the property, but all the supportive services that, you're planning to pay for, that you're keeping in a reserve. And that's how Homekey, works. We, plan out for the years later of being able to pay for these supportive services. So, so right now, at least from the development side, that's been a challenge, just trying to meet that occupancy deadline. But we're gearing toward it, and we're targeting our date to have construction be completed by then, so that we can fully lease up the units.
And Chelsea?
Sure. Thank you. So for us, in talking with my colleague, my partner in our housing team, and even in consulting with Dan, there's a couple of themes that we've kind of come through and have encountered just through this process. So the land use override is a component of Homekey, which is really helpful. It helps clear some of the administrative hurdles it takes to get development underway. But with that, sometimes our planning partners aren't always aware of some of these updates and changes that have happened with Homekey. So I think it's just critical working with county partners through this, or city or jurisdiction, whatever is the lead applicant, through some of this, because they may have less awareness of the notice of funding availability that where Homekey addresses this. And even though we have the right to go ahead and build and things like that, there still is some importance in trying to secure that local support as best as possible. Mesa's first identified area, they did get a hint of NIMBYism, and so that still exists and persists even with this. Not that we need that approval, but sometimes it makes for a better outcome for everybody to work along together. The program, being new and innovative, has been exciting and really neat. It's bringing housing rapidly to our jurisdictions across the state in a very needed way. However, with that, some of these precedents haven't been set, or some of our systems, in the local side may not be as moving as quickly to try to respond to this new and innovative program. And so sometimes it is kind of navigating our internal structures to try to match the rapidity of this program. And then we were lucky to receive funding for round 1, and we've seen just some differences in round 2, and I think some of this is attributed to the newness factor, but we're seeing that there's been modifications. And so for those who have applied or are planning on applying for Homekey 3, just be aware that there might be some modifications. And so what we thought we knew, may have been modified slightly, and so it's that unfamiliar territory that we're kind of navigating sometimes with this. Jocelyn touched on the funding sources and just being mindful that, federal funding may have certain requirements. Timelines may not match up in terms of how Homekey is moving, quickly versus how federal funds might move. So just being mindful of those funding sources and what's needed for each one of those. I think that's something that we've encountered a lot with Mesa's project, and likely some of our other projects that we're working with too. The workload considerations, if housing isn't your wheelhouse or you haven't worked in that realm, your county and city might be a great resource to help you through this, but also understand there's a lot of intricacies with each of these projects. I think Dan, Kyle, and I talk, and my colleague Tracy, I think we all talk pretty much daily, multiple times a day, to work through getting this project underway. And so just being mindful that yes, there's funding coming, it's quick, it's all those things, and it's great, but there's a lot that comes with this, and there's a lot of work involved in it. I've kind of touched on the funding timeline. Actually, what I will say is Mesa secured the longest purchase agreement that they possibly could with the seller, but unfortunately it still wasn't quite long enough for them between when the award happened and when escrow closed. And so for those who are looking to do Homekey, just be really mindful about the timeline for how long you can hold that property, the costs involved with holding the property, because it may not happen just instant. You get your award, but there's still stuff that has to happen in working with our colleagues in HCD to make that funding come too. So being mindful about that is really critical. Jocelyn, again, kind of hit on some of the preparation and costs associated with just going through the application process. So there are environmental needs. Even if you don't have to do a NEPA, you still have to do a phase 1 environmental review. You have to do a physical needs assessment, and those all cost money. And those might not be things that smaller nonprofits or those who aren't necessarily working in housing are familiar with. And so reading that NOFA, reading that through the application, double checking the checklist of what's required for the project is really critical, because things can kind of get missed even with multiple eyes on a project. And so I think those are really critical pieces. And then I think, Homekey has been wonderful about providing operating subsidies, but it only goes so far for so many years. And so Jocelyn hit on the pro forma and just being mindful of, you're going to have to pay, to keep the lights on after 7 years, after 15 years, you know, and so on and so forth. So that's an ongoing, I think, theme though for any kind of housing development is how you keep those lights on and the operations going. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. And I want to thank all of our panelists from Mesa Ojai, Valley Lodge Apartments, and HCD. We will be hearing more from each of you a little bit later during the Q&A to finish this presentation. But now, to continue the theme about potential resources and advice for potential applicants to round 3, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Simone Turek-Lee, who will be going over some resources that JBAY has put together to help you finding some funding sources and apply for the next round of Homekey.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good week. So here at JBAY, we've been trying to find ways to support local projects applying for Homekey that intend to serve youth. We're really excited about the set aside. We've been working closely with HCD. HCD has been so committed to the set aside, and we so appreciate that and appreciate the leadership in the governor's office and the legislature for moving forward with that. And so we've been trying to support things kind of at the state level and at a local level. And one thing that seems to come up a lot are challenges around trying to figure out how to fund, you know, the rental subsidies and the operating costs, you know, and the operating costs and the services. You know, as you all know, as you heard, you know, Homekey builds the housing. And, you know, while there is some Homekey funding awarded for operating, there's a lot of piecing together that of funding sources and fundraising that has to be done to make a project whole and to make it viable in the long term, as you know, Chelsea was just getting at. So, of course, a project serving youth could potentially use the same funding sources used for projects serving homeless adults and families, unless it's some sort of special population-specific funding stream. So that's out there. But I think what's less known to a lot of people in the state is what are the youth-specific funding sources? How do we tap into those? And some of the acronyms were thrown out there earlier in the presentation. And so we have a document that, for one, I guess, demystifies all these acronyms, but also just puts it out there. What are the youth-specific funding sources? We basically put together, you know, a technical assistance tool for Homekey. That outlines all of the youth-specific funding sources. And so this includes federal, state, local funding streams. And some are ongoing funding, some are kind of one-time funding sources, and they might be funded multi-year. Some are population-specific, so they might be specifically for current or former foster youth. Some are broader than that. But this is brand new. We just posted it on our website this week, so you can check it out at the link on the screen. And when we do our follow-up email to everyone who registered for this webinar, we'll also be sending every link that was in this PowerPoint. We'll go into that email. So don't worry if you're trying to kind of figure out the links and having trouble, that will all come to you. Another thing that we're doing to support projects is offering some sort of, you know, technical assistance and some funding, some planning grants. And our technical assistance is different than the technical assistance that HCD provides. Obviously, they are providing highly technical, you know, official Homekey technical assistance. What we are really the role we're trying to fill largely is helping people match. So helping local projects find their partners is one thing. You know, you have public entities that may not know who their youth providers are, or you have developers that may not be acquainted with youth providers, or you have youth providers who may not know about local developers, or they may need help navigating to their local public entity possibly. So we're doing some of that matching support and also just general consultation on like, what is Homekey and how can you potentially maybe become part of a project? So kind of helping people get to that point to where they can partner. And then, you know, once you submit that pre-application consultation, you can access the official technical assistance from HCD and HCD's TA providers. But really, a lot of people are needing support getting kind of to that front door. And so our technical assistance is really designed in that way. And then we pair it with some financial support. Now, we are doing this for both Homekey and for the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program. So HAP is something very different than Homekey. but it's a public funding source, for homelessness that has a youth set aside that we want to help make sure people are, youth providers are accessing. And so we can provide some assistance with either of these. But since we're talking about Homekey today, I'll really focus on that. Some examples of what people would use a planning grant for Homekey, I think most commonly is to hire a consultant who could help project manage on the front end or maybe help prepare the application. It could also offset other kind of staffing costs associated with applying for funding. It can take a sizable portion of a single staff member's time being a part of this project, one of these projects, as I'm sure anyone who's been on these projects could speak to. So, we are trying to be flexible in what these planning grants cover. They'll probably range from between 20 and 30,000. And there's a kind of a one-pager on the opportunity, and that link is on the screen to the one-pager. And then to inquire about getting some assistance or potentially a planning grant, you can contact Andy, who's been moderating today, and his email is on the screen there. And I also just want to say that we very much appreciate our funding partners that have enabled us to make this level of assistance available. And that is the Walter S. Johnson Foundation, Tipping Point, Conrad and Hilton Foundation, and the Carrie Estelle Doheny Foundation. So we've received generous support from each of these foundations to support some of this either assistance or planning grants related to Homekey and or HAP. So one more thing before we jump into Q&A, one more kind of set of resources. This is not brand new. We did, I think, mention this on our Homekey webinar, which was, I believe, last August. But we, as I mentioned, we do a lot of kind of, we're like matchmakers. We talk to a bunch of different worlds. We try to be familiar with, local homeless continuums of care and foster care providers and college campuses and public county agencies. So we really try to be, work with lots of different groups and help connect different stakeholder groups to one another. And so, navigating and identifying local partners, if that's a challenge, we're trying to help with that with these rosters. So you may be able to do that matching without even talking to us if you look at one of these rosters, but we're also happy to help you with it. Some of these rosters we developed for other purposes, and they've really come in handy for Homekey. So we have a county contact roster that was actually originally developed really based on HAP contacts. Then we have a public housing authority roster as well. We developed based on actually FUP and FYI vouchers, but it's super coming in handy for Homekey as well. We also have, we don't have a city roster. That's one thing we don't have, but we do have, this is a new thing. We developed a affordable housing developer roster. We noticed that one really didn't exist. So we think this is a fairly exhaustive list. It may not be 100%, but it certainly has a ton of developers on there. So you can see who's local. And then we have various types of different youth provider rosters. So we have providers that were funded previously, that are currently or previously funded under HAP or its predecessor HEAP. We have providers that have THP plus contracts, and that's to serve former foster youth. And then we have providers that are foster care placements for young adults, the THP NMD foster care placement, which is essentially transitional housing as THP plus is. So again, you can contact Andy for individualized assistance, but we hope these rosters come in handy. I am going to now pass it back over to Andy. We are going to dive into Q&A. Feel free to keep submitting questions. He has a bunch in queue that he'll start asking, but feel free to continue submitting.
Thank you so much, Simone. And you see our contact information here on the screen. An answer to a question that we are getting is that yes, we will be sharing links to this presentation as well as a recording of the presentation in an email later today. And I'd like to start with a question to the HCD team. We've gotten several just process questions about what the next round of funding is going to look like. And I suppose I would just ask generally, well, first of all, what the schedule is going to be like, when our application is going to be opening up for the next round, what will be the total amount of funding available, and what can you share about the process and how folks might be eligible and how they can apply?
Thank you. I'll say that there's a lot of uncertainty about round 3 right now. We have a budget pending that will tell us how much funding is actually available for round 3. As you all may know, Homekey was appropriated almost $3 billion last year for this fiscal year and the following fiscal year. But recently, the department has been pulling funds that were appropriated for the next fiscal year to make awards for projects that were submitted under round 2, because we've had such great demand for the program and these projects are ready to be funded. So the governor included a $150 million augmentation in his budget, and we expect that, that goes to the legislature and they'll make some decisions about how much more funding, if any, will come our way. But just we're continuing to fund projects under round 2, and we expect to fund over $2 billion worth of projects at this moment. So in terms of the application deadline and the timeline for round 3, our statute mandates that we make our NOFA available to the public, I think within 3 months of July 1st. So meaning in the fall, we have to have released that NOFA, and we expect to work on this NOFA through the summer, perhaps to adjust things that didn't work very well in round 2. It also depends on how much funding we have and the type of program that we end up designing, but we envision the same, very similar bounds for eligible projects, and obviously the 8% set aside holds because it's mandated in statute. And we expect to hold a lot of stakeholder conversations. We're trying to figure out what the best way to do that is, given that we don't have a ton of time to collect feedback, but we're definitely interested to hear from all of you who have, boots on the ground experience about the things that we could do better next time.
Thank you so much, Angela. My next question is going to go to Jocelyn with Burbank Housing. The question is, how can private philanthropy be part of this effort to help transition age youth and other young adults?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And we've been fortunate on our Homekey projects to partner with local philanthropy, and more specifically, Providence Queen of the Valley Medical Center in Napa. And, more and more we're seeing health organizations partner on supportive housing projects. We all know there is a link between housing and health, and how housing, helps, promote better health outcomes. And, I would say, look into your local community and who are the, significant health providers who could, benefit from, your organization developing permanent supportive housing or interim housing. And, a lot of the health organizations in our town have collaborated, or in Napa have collaborated with, Abode and, and on some of our other projects. And, they've been able to provide crucial funding for, being able to pay for those supportive services, that we're keeping these operating subsidies for. So, I think, health organizations are really a good source because of that link between health and housing. And for us, that's been the case on our Homekey projects.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. My next question is going to go to Dan at Mesa. How do young people find employment in such a rural area and have their transportation needs met?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, we definitely have to balance the benefits of being in a place like Ojai from, I think, kind of a wellness standpoint, with the fact that it's a small community. We don't have any colleges here in Ojai, so we need to be able to provide transportation for that. We are about a mile from a major bus route that takes people throughout the county, but we will be providing shuttle services and providing each of the participants with an e-bike to assist with some transportation issues. In terms of employment, my partner in this work, Kyle Thompson, was the co-founder of Topa Topa Brewing here in Ventura County. He's a lifelong entrepreneur who has a ton of relationships with local businesses, and we've been building up a pretty incredible list of companies who are willing to hire our participants. I think that this is it's a silver lining for sure, but people are having a really hard time hiring right now. Labor is short, so being able to provide folks who can theoretically earn a lower wage and afford to live here is actually really beneficial. Obviously, we're trying to help them get as high of a wage as possible, but for entry-level positions, being able to have access to that free housing is huge. So hopefully that helps to answer the question.
Definitely. Thank you, Dan. The next question is going to go toward John Burton Advocates for Youth, which I'm happy to provide the answer for. And that's that, does JBAY provide assistance for those wanting to do new projects? The answer is yes. Any project serving youth, we are happy to consult with and see how we could potentially help. Again, you have my contact information here on this page as well as Simone's, but feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions about that process. Our next question is, we're going to go back to the HCD team. And the question is, what kind of youth-centric support services are you requiring from your nonprofit service providers?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question? Was that for me?
No worries.
I apologize.
Yeah, no worries. So what kind of youth-centric support services are you requiring from your nonprofit service providers?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a good question because frankly, our NOFA round 2 didn't have a lot of specificity for any services in general. It has a very broad paragraph with what the requirements are. Our application tab includes, very specifically which supports you're going to be providing, the type of staffing that is required, who from which agencies the staffing is going to come from. We even ask you to quantify, what the services, if they're in kind, what the value of the services are. So I think we're going to do that much better in round 3. We're going to be more specific about what we require. In round 2, we thought that we would leave it up to the applicant to tell us what it is that your local community needs. And because, HCD has been historically a housing, affordable housing funder and not a supportive services funder, we also have been going through a huge learning experience in supportive services. And so now we have a robust group of folks who are experienced in reviewing and looking at applications and ensuring that the services are adequate. So we left it again up to the locals to tell us what their population needs, and then we obviously look at best practices generally, and we through our learning, we've heard a lot from practitioners, nonprofits, and folks, again, boots on the ground, who are doing this work. And so that's really informed what it is that we're looking for in these plans. And for any plans that have been deficient or not meeting the mark, we have been referring to our partners for TA to make a robust supportive services plan that really meets the needs, and that's something that, again, we're keeping an eye on for round 3 and how to do it better.
Thank you. My next question is going to be for either Janine or Amber, your choice, over at Valley Lodge Apartments. We received a couple questions about the youth coordinated entry system in Napa. And how would you describe the way youth are identified and prioritized through the CES in Napa? And is the process any different for a young person?
Janine, you want me to go first, or you want to go first?
I can kick us off. So there is a separate coordinated entry for TAY There's sort of a different assessment. NVI SPDAT specifically is the assessment tool that we use in Napa. So there is a separate list from TAY and chronic or literal homeless. So Abode, Abode Services provides housing and outreach services in Napa County aside from this specific project. So generally we have an outreach team who would administer the VI SPDAT, depending on what the age of the individual was, they would use a different tool. And I know Voices sort of recently underwent a pretty robust training around coordinated entry in Napa County. So Amber, feel free to relay your experience there.
As a foster care provider, we had never had to enter into HMIS in the past. It's only been with HEAP dollars and HAP dollars where we've had to have that requirement. So my staff had to learn all about the HMIS system, which is a beast of a system. In Napa, what we did was we created a special outreach project in HMIS that Voices is using in order to be able to capture the specifics around the young people needing the services that they're needing. And so what that allows for is a designated space for the young people to be captured there. And the plan is what, if my understanding is correct with what Napa County wants to do, and this is what we want to help them do, is to actually build out a separated coordinated entry system that will focus specifically on the young people, because as we know, they can get kind of lost in the shuffle. And so it's great. I think that lots of counties are actually thinking about how to do youth-specific coordinated entries. We have some challenges with the TAY VSPDAT as the assessment, and so are interested in other kinds of assessments. But it was an excellent learning experience. And what they did was, like I said, they really allowed us to set up for Voices our own outreach project in HMIS, which we then allowed the young people to set up the questions and the pieces of data that they were going to collect. And so we have a very personalized tool for being able to collect that information.
Thank you. And I have just one more question I'd like to squeeze in for HCD. And if you could provide a clarification on the difference between interim and permanent housing.
So I saw that Dan has also answered some of these questions on the chat regarding the difference, but from a regulatory perspective, they have different restrictions for how long the project has to be. Like, for example, for permanent, we are asking that you restrict the units for 55 years, or for interim it's 15 years. And the programming is different. And again, maybe I'll ask Dan to elaborate more on that, because he had pretty good answers on that. But from our perspective too, an interim unit will look very differently than a permanent unit. A permanent unit has, a kitchenette or a way for people to live in that unit for a long period of time. And an interim unit is something more transitional. So that's how we see it on our end. Dan, would you help explain the difference a little more from the services perspective?
Sure, yeah. So just difference between transitional and permanent housing would be the nature of the relationship between the tenant, so to speak, and the housing provider. So in a transitional housing setting, there is no formal lease. You can use kind of housing agreements or things like that, but it's not a formal legal lease. And the stay is a maximum of 24 months. Within permanent housing, a regular lease is used. All of the same kind of fair housing standards are applied, and the housing is as long as the tenant wants to stay there and is compliant with the lease.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone who participated today, everyone from Valley Lodge Apartments, Mesa Ojai, and HCD. I'd like to thank my colleague Simone for her wonderful job managing the slide deck as well as the Q&A. Again, we will be emailing out a recording of today. I will link to the recording of the webinar, as well as the slide deck and links to the profiles of each of these projects that are going to be available on our website. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you again to everybody who participated and provided their expertise. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and week and a great Memorial Day weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.